Hi, everybody. It's the show with Ron again, where we add context and commentary to the headlines. Because these headlines are presented to us. The media wants to make us feel something. They want us to march in a parade. They want us to get excited about something. They think they're educating us. And these are good things. The media has to do that. But the media can be biased as well. And there's a lot of stuff that, even in this day and age where all the information should be freely available online and lots of context in articles, a lot of these articles are very bare bones in their reporting, which I suspect has to do with AI sometimes. But let's get right to it. I wasn't even going to do a show today because it's actually Easter, and usually, weekends are slow news days, and it's not very interesting stuff in the news that's being pumped out to us, presented to us. But today there were some interesting things, not the least of which is this: rising global threats force epoch-making shift in world order. So, we see this, and if you've been watching the channel, I've been talking about this for months. We have the situation where global power is shifting. We have countries like Russia and China certainly sense a disconnect in the American public in wanting to engage in foreign wars. A lot of countries around the world see that, and this may be a once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make the move. Certainly, Russia decided it was time to make the move during Biden's administration. And China, for quite a few years now, has been going out in the South China Seas and really antagonizing all of the countries around them, which they should be trying to make them their allies, but instead they're saying this open point of sea is all of ours, and so the U.S. is the global policeman. They have our soldiers. It's a good bet that some of our soldiers are stationed in your country right now, maintaining the peace, and the U.S. taxpayer is paying for it. And we have hundreds of bases. I don't know if hundreds, over 100 bases. A lot of soldiers everywhere maintaining the peace. This is part of what's been going on since the end of World War II. That world order that tried to maintain the peace and stand up against the Soviet Union, that created its own bloc of countries. By the end of the 1980s, through a long period of pressure from the UK and the US, and especially from the Reagan administration in the 80s, the Soviet Union collapsed. Their whole system fell apart, and everybody cheered and declared the end of history. Now, at that time, we remember there were also countries that tried to jump out and do something that they wanted to do. Saddam Hussein, right at the peak point of the weakness of the Soviet Union, he invaded Kuwait. This is, a lot of countries around the world, I wouldn't say everyone, but a lot, they have something they want to do. China would like to extend its power out into the South China Seas for both defense, possible energy resources. The U.S. is patrols right up to their doorstep. So we have things in South America where we had, was it Venezuela, saying, well, we'd just like to take over a neighboring country. It's just something we'd like to do. This is all around the world. So we had the last big juncture of history around the time of the weakness and collapse of the Soviet Union. We did have wars. We had the first invasion of Kuwait, and then we saw how the end of the Soviet Union, and by the middle of the 1990s, unleashed a lot of pent-up problems, like in Bosnia-Herzegovina in Europe, where you had these, many decades old I mean, in some cases, century-old disagreements that boiled to the surface that had only been tamped down in all those intervening years in Yugoslavia. But we still had overall people saying, well, it was the end of history. People thought communism was that there was an inevitable march communists thought to their system. But it was actually the opposite, probably the other way around. There's an inevitable march towards democracy and freedom because all those countries became more open. They didn't say, well, the Soviet system has fallen, we'd like to retain communism. Few countries did, but that's where the countries that didn't have a revolution. And what the world didn't see, maybe it was there. I don't know if anybody saw it. I like everybody was enjoying this peace that had started because I grew up under the threat of nuclear annihilation. But there was one big area in the world with a lot of business, commercial, and social potential that still had not been liberalized, and that was the Middle East, the Arab world. Incredible education, culture, history that those nations had. There's also a lot of possibility for a transit point for business. There were all those countries were underdeveloped, and we've seen in intervening years where Dubai and Bahrain and Oman have created their Singapore-like state as a place for business to be, that where there's actually international laws and norms of laws that are undertaken there. But before that happened, the world was shocked by the stuff that happened in 9/11. And one way to see the rise of all that fundamentalism in its various guises was as a positive sign in the effect that it was a reaction to the inevitable opening up of the Arab world. All of these little groups that tried to turn things back to a caliphate or whatever were because they were reacting to open liberalism, the terrible things that were happening in their country, women being able to drive, being able to see women's faces, this sort of thing. I'm being a little flippant there, but one way, again, to see all of these very extreme things that rose up. They don't just happen in a vacuum, they happen in a reaction to something. And you see it at the base. They were furious about these progressive, what they would see as perverted governments in their own countries, aligning with the West and allowing this liberalization. And of course, the U.S., as any country would, overreacted to the events of 9/11, went to war against two countries, and then three. First, we had Iraq, and we had Afghanistan. There were reasons probably to go into those, and you win some and you lose some. And certainly the second Bush administration was very terrible in explaining what they were doing, why they were doing, and overestimating how quick they could do it. And then the third war was after they got rid of George W. Bush for being a war criminal and a terrible person for starting these wars. They got in a Democrat, Obama, and he started a war in Libya. One that was even more kind of an unneeded war there, and it was as big as a disaster as George W. Bush's war. But media didn't have much to say about that. They didn't criticize him that much. So that's just the way of the world, and we've been going along. Now we're in another juncture in history, and I guess the question is, why are we in this juncture of history? One issue is that the West, the United States, has become, the country that is the world's policeman has become almost energy independent. And even beyond the age of oil, we can see a time where technology will allow us to not have to care about the Middle East anymore. Because there's just as much horror and violence in Africa as there in the Middle East, but U.S. doesn't It doesn't pour huge resources into Africa. I mean, I understand they have recently with France. France is the one that gets involved in Africa, but the world has a strategic interest in the Middle East, and as the reasons for that strategic interest recede, the U.S. has receded from being the world's policeman. And at the same time, in the 20 years since the end of the 1990s, when Clinton was president, where there was about 500 or 600 million dollar national debt, maybe wrong on something like that. It hadn't reached $1 trillion yet, but it was a relatively small national debt. And Clinton himself, he achieved a lot of the goals the Republicans said they were going to do in the 80s, and Clinton had balanced the budget. So we had a balanced budget, national debt under $1 trillion. In that 20 years, now we have, $34 trillion in national debt, and we're adding $1 trillion to that every 100 days. So the U.S. is destroying itself, as many democracies do over time. There's never been a currency that hasn't destroyed itself in this manner. Guess it's time for the U.S. dollar to finally to have this situation. So that's another reason why people and the government may not be is interested in engaging in the world. And we see the reaction to the United States' long-term ally and democracy, Israel, there, who has done a lot of heavy carrying for American foreign policy in the Middle East over the years. The U.S., the reaction of the public has been strangely against Israel in the wake of the terrorist and the hostage taking against Israel right at the beginning. And then Israel has sort of replied by validating all the criticism by just horrible, indiscriminate killing in Gaza. So they've messed up as well. They should have the public on their side, but I mean, Israel has no one to blame but themselves. They saw how the media and the public hyper focused on the U.S. and its foreign wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. You gotta watch that collateral damage. And here we are today, where we're at another juncture of history. Juncture history in the late 80s when the Soviet Union fell. Juncture of history in 2001 when it became clear that the Middle East, that the progressive things that were happening in the Middle East was causing a blowback, and those areas needed attention. And now here we are, another 20 years later, where the U.S. is receding from engagement in the world. And that's all exemplified by someone like Donald Trump. Donald Trump is returning the Republican Party to its pre-World War II isolationist roots that said, let those people overseas in Europe have their wars, and we're over here in the U.S. on our farms doing our thing. And the countries see that, and they see the pressure that someone like Biden has been under to try to toe the traditional line. The Democrats have stepped up and taken the foreign policy positions that the Republicans used to do. So, this is, here's the other, Kamala Harris, the vice president, who has been widely criticized, even and on the left, as being maybe not up to the task of performing before the public. But here, they're creating a role for her as a more liberal and progressive person that can make sure that the voters who might flee from Biden because of his initial support of Israel, about his resistance to a border wall, she can voice the concerns of those people and portray a more progressive position on these issues. So here she's talking about, screaming for a immediate ceasefire in Gaza. This is something that Biden has only been slowly dragged up to doing a very slowly. Just recently, they've been went into the UN, the U.S., and did not vote against the ceasefire, which the U.S. was always a country that stood with Israel and blocked in any of these the pronouncements trying to say that Israel doesn't exist, blah blah blah. And also we have here Kamala Harris standing up for abortion rights in a more enthusiastic manner. So this is an interesting role that they've cooked up for her, and it's a tricky thing because with Biden at his age and the way we have seen him act in public, and certainly the Republicans are going to say that this is not Trump versus Biden, it's Trump versus Kamala Harris. That Biden is not even there right now. And I didn't want to forget this. This came in and out of the news so quickly. Donald Trump posts a video of truck showing hog-tied Joe Biden. I guess one of those AI images. This really goes beyond the bounds of the way presidents, ever conducted themselves in the past. But it's exactly the way Trump has always conducted himself in the past. The media went wild over this, but I think ultimately it's not anything we didn't know about Trump. It shows how this new era of social media, where the wildest and the craziest anything goes, is polluting even the highest levels of politics. Gosh, that was longer than I expected. Let's see. I'm not sure if there's anything in the news that can top that, but we'll see if there's anything else. Other day we talked about the cicadas. That's really good. You can watch yesterday's video. I witnessed that when I was a kid. It's one of the epic great things in the world you can witness. Here's an FBI agent saying he hassles people every day, all day long over Facebook posts. Some lady who was posting Facebook supposedly stuff against the war, the Israel and the war there, and so the FBI showed up. Again, a lot of these stories we only hear from the side of the social media influencer. And the person who is accused or on the end of this, they're always liars. There's always big, huge omissions. It's like those people who are screaming, the police arrested me for no reason. I had to stay in jail for no reason. And say, well, I don't think that there must be a reason. You were convicted of something. Now, you may say that I am innocent of it, but these sort of articles, I don't know. And even the way that the FBI responded to it, kind of said, yes, we do, just to make sure everything's okay, and we wouldn't have done it over what she said. So they're implying that maybe there's more to this story of what this lady was saying. Again, we got to watch out that we don't get riled up by all of these posts where people are saying, oh, Biden's government, Biden's administration is cracking down on all of us, our free speech. Certainly there's isolated incidents of all of these things, but got to make sure we have the whole story. And we push back when they're wrong, and sometimes the government is wrong. Lizzo, that does seem there's a lot of hate towards her. I think she would have done better if she was just an artist without all of the fat positivity. I believe the negativity around her is because the media tried to say she's a gorgeous bombshell because she's fat. I think there was that underlying social education there that included, instead of her just being a performer, You know, there are other bigger ladies in the media, Oprah or whatever, but the media never tried to tell us that Oprah was a bombshell. You just stand on the talent that you have, and that's it. Okay. I don't know why I'm interested in this. Maybe as an American, our iconic godlike leaders from the past, George Washington. I mean, a guy like this, the pictures of him in his kind of British style powdered wig, he doesn't even look like a human of our era today. Even eras 100 years ago, he doesn't look like them. So an exotic, unusual lifestyle lived, and here they're probing into DNA of the other family members in unmarked graves around his own to pick them apart. Imagine, the stuff that was in the heads of people in this time. I mean, dinosaurs weren't even discovered or understood until decades later, so they didn't even know anything about dinosaurs, much less the scale of our universe. And now there's unknown people in their graves that they're poking away at the DNA that still exists. And we're all headed that direction, to the grave. I don't know what any of that means, but makes you wonder sometimes. It's Easter today. Oh, yeah. More about these nuke strikes coming. That's part of this big juncture of history we're coming into now. Countries feeling like they should make their move. Might be the only time they can do so. And I think that's about it. When you start out talking about this epoch-making juncture in history, that it looks like we're coming up to another one. It can be scary, but if we look back and think about those other two ones I was talking about, the fall of the Soviet Union, and then the rise of the Islamic terrorism in response to the liberalization in the Middle East. Maybe if we look at those and we got through those. It was a lot of fuss and bother, but we did. I think we're probably going to get through our current situation as well. The history is long, and we don't live that long, but we can look at it and see that things happen, and people made it through it one way or another. And this is my book. Disillusioned by the promises of the modern world, young people make their way to Bangkok and then on to the furthest places they can find. There are still unknown places. And I just heard my book is now available at Kinokuniya branches at M Quarter, Central World, and Siam Paragon. I really wanted them to carry it, and it's in literature, which is cool, so this is another dream come true for me. Read it and let me know what you think, please. Thanks. So that is my book. It feeds into some of the or it takes from some of the same issues I talk about here, some of the disillusionment with the world that's out there, and where we can find ourselves, how we can disconnect ourselves again from the media, the people that are trying to get us to march in their parade, to go down fighting for them. And I hope you would like and subscribe. I'm trying to grow the channel, but I do know that when one talks about some of these subjects openly, the scope of history, the failures not only of Trump but of Biden and other presidents, sometimes you can get shadow banned, and I do know that, some of the things I mentioned, these big media companies and maybe the government behind them has decided they really just don't want you to hear about them. They don't want to get involved in talking about them. So I'd really like it if you like and subscribe and come back. I've got videos both about this subject and the other subject. I'm very much into books and reading. I'm reading all these old adventure novels, some of the classic books of the early mid 20th century. I think those are much more important to read than maybe current things. Current movies and books maybe should wait about 20 years. Don't read anything that's younger than 20 years old, especially if you haven't gone back to the classics. But anyway, like and subscribe, come back, and we'll keep trying to add context and commentary so we can have a more stress-free life and understand what's going on in the world. Bye-bye.